The ladle trembled in Marcus Chen's hand as he served mashed potatoes to the woman in the faded denim jacket. Her auburn hair was tucked under a worn baseball cap, and dirt smudges marked her cheekbones, but those emerald eyes were unmistakable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The same eyes that had looked at him 7 years ago when she said she needed space to focus on her career. The same eyes that belonged to Jessica Walsh, now CEO of TechNova Solutions, one of Chicago's fastest-growing software companies. She kept her gaze down, mumbling a quiet thank you as she moved through the serving line at Hope's kitchen. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched her find a seat at a corner table, hunched over her tray like someone who genuinely had nowhere else to go. What was Jessica Walsh, a woman whose net worth had been featured in Forbes magazine just last month, doing at a soup kitchen on the south side of Chicago, dressed like she hadn't seen a paycheck in months? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus continued serving, his mind racing. He had been volunteering at Hope's kitchen every Saturday for 3 years, ever since Emma started kindergarten, and he finally had regular free time. It had become his sanctuary, a place where his past as a marketing executive didn't matter, where his divorce didn't define him, where he could simply be Marcus the volunteer, who showed up consistently and cared about people having a warm meal. Now, to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to where it all began for Marcus. 3 years earlier, his world had crumbled in the span of 6 months. His wife Rebecca had left him for her personal trainer, taking half their savings and leaving him with full custody of 5-year-old Emma. The custody battle had drained his emergency fund, and the stress had affected his performance at Morrison & Associates, the marketing firm where he had worked for 8 years. When the company downsized, Marcus was among the first to be let go. Finding work in his 40s proved more challenging than he had anticipated. Age discrimination was real, but impossible to prove. Interviews that started promisingly would end with polite rejections. Meanwhile, Emma needed stability, school supplies, and groceries. Marcus took whatever work he could find, from freelance consulting projects that paid late to part-time retail jobs that barely covered rent. His pride had died a slow death during those months of financial struggle. The apartment they moved into was a far cry from their suburban home. The elevator rarely worked, and Emma's bedroom window overlooked an alley where stray cats fought over garbage scraps. But Emma never complained. She would sit at their second-hand kitchen table doing homework while Marcus prepared dinner from whatever was on sale at the discount grocery store. She made friends with Mrs. Rodriguez next door, who would watch her for free when Marcus had to work evening shifts. Emma was 8 now, with her mother's blonde curls and Marcus's stubborn determination. She had adapted to their new life with the resilience that children possess when they feel truly loved. Every morning, she would wake up early to make Marcus coffee in the cheap coffee maker they had bought at a thrift store. She had learned to braid her own hair and pack her own lunch, small acts of independence that broke Marcus's heart even as they filled him with pride.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The volunteering at Hope's kitchen had started as a practical decision. Emma spent Saturday mornings at her friend Lily's house for playdates, and Marcus needed something to do with his time besides worry about bills and job applications. The kitchen needed reliable volunteers, and Marcus needed to feel useful again. Sister Margaret, who ran the operation, had taken one look at his application and put him on serving duty immediately. Over the months, Marcus had found purpose in the simple act of serving food to people who needed it. There was dignity in honest work, even unpaid work, and the regular volunteers had become like family. There was Carlos, a retired teacher who managed the morning prep, and Janet, a nurse who worked nights and spent her free mornings chopping vegetables. They had all welcomed Marcus without questions about his past or judgments about his circumstances. The kitchen served anyone who walked through the doors between 11 and 2 on Saturdays. Some were homeless individuals who knew the schedule by heart. Others were families struggling between paychecks, parents who swallowed their pride to make sure their children had a nutritious meal. Marcus had learned not to make assumptions about anyone's story. The woman in designer shoes might be fleeing an abusive relationship with nothing but the clothes on her back. The man in the expensive watch might be living in his car after losing his job and his home. But Jessica Walsh didn't fit any category Marcus could understand. She was worth millions, according to every business publication in the city. TechNova Solutions employed over 300 people and had contracts with major corporations nationwide. Jessica lived in a penthouse in downtown Chicago and drove a Tesla that cost more than Marcus made in 2 years of freelance work. What possible reason could she have for sitting in Hope's kitchen, pretending to need charity? Marcus tried to focus on his duties, but his eyes kept drifting to Jessica's table. She ate slowly, mechanically, as if the food was just fuel rather than the carefully prepared meal that Carlos had spent hours perfecting. She didn't talk to anyone, didn't make eye contact with other diners, and seemed genuinely uncomfortable with her surroundings. Either she was the world's best actress, or something was seriously wrong. When she finished eating, Jessica stood and walked toward the exit without looking back. Marcus watched her leave, his mind churning with questions and memories he had tried hard to bury. Their relationship had ended 7 years ago, but seeing her again brought back the rush of emotions he thought he had processed and moved past. The love, the hurt, the confusion, and now this strange new mystery of why the woman who had chosen success over their future was sitting in a soup kitchen pretending to be someone she wasn't. That night, Marcus lay in his narrow bed listening to the sounds of the city through thin walls while Emma slept peacefully in the next room. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment he had recognized Jessica. 7 years felt like a lifetime and an instant simultaneously. He remembered the Jessica he had fallen in love with during their graduate program at Northwestern University, which she was passionate about technology but still believed in work-life balance. When she would spend entire Sundays with him exploring Chicago neighborhoods and planning a future together. Jessica Walsh had been different then. Driven but not ruthless, ambitious but not at the expense of everything else. They had met in an entrepreneurship class where she was presenting a business plan for educational software that would help underserved communities access quality learning resources. Marcus had been working on his MBA while managing marketing campaigns for a small nonprofit, and something about her vision had captivated him immediately. After class, he had approached her with questions about implementation strategies, and their conversation had stretched through coffee, dinner, and a long walk along Lake Michigan. Their relationship had developed with the intensity that only graduate students could manage, fueled by late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and the intoxicating belief that they could change the world together. Jessica would code until 3 in the morning, and Marcus would bring her sandwiches and energy drinks, listening as she explained complex algorithms with the enthusiasm of someone who had found her calling. They balanced each other in every way and seemed destined for a future filled with groundbreaking innovation and unbreakable love.
Other perfectly. She provided the technical innovation, and he understood how to communicate those innovations to people who needed them. The proposal had happened during their final semester, on the same bench where they had sat during that first long conversation. Marcus had saved for months to buy the ring, a modest diamond that Jessica had worn proudly despite her friends' comments about its size. They had planned to start their company together after graduation, combining her software development skills with his marketing expertise. The business plan they had written together was detailed and realistic, outlining how they would bootstrap their way to success while maintaining the social mission that had brought them together. But success, when it came, had been more seductive and demanding than either of them had anticipated. Jessica's educational software caught the attention of a venture capital firm during a university pitch competition. Suddenly, there were meetings with investors, discussions about scaling rapidly, and pressure to pivot toward more profitable market segments. The social mission that had driven Jessica's original vision became a secondary consideration as board members pushed for features that would appeal to wealthy school districts rather than underserved communities. Marcus watched the woman he loved transform under the pressure of sudden opportunity. The 16-hour days became 18-hour days, then 20-hour days. Weekend plans were canceled for investor meetings. Their shared apartment became a place Jessica visited between coding sessions and business development calls. The ring stayed on her finger, but their conversations about wedding plans grew shorter and less frequent, pushed aside by discussions about product launches and market penetration strategies. The breaking point had come during what was supposed to be their engagement party. Marcus had planned a small gathering of family and friends at his parents' house in suburban Oak Park, a chance to celebrate their relationship and their upcoming wedding in a setting that felt warm and personal. Jessica had promised to take the evening off, to focus on their personal life for just a few hours. But 30 minutes into the party, she was in the kitchen taking calls from potential clients on the West Coast, unable to disconnect from the business that was consuming her identity. Marcus had found her there, pacing while explaining technical specifications to someone who was 3 time zones away and apparently couldn't wait until Monday for answers. Their families were in the living room making polite conversation. Emma was running around showing off her flower girl dress to anyone who would pay attention, and Jessica was negotiating contract terms with a stranger instead of celebrating their future together. The argument that followed had been quiet, but devastating. Marcus hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made ultimatums or demands. He had simply asked Jessica if she still wanted to get married, if there was still room in her life for a relationship that required presence and attention and compromise. Her answer had been a request for space, for time to figure out how to balance everything she wanted to achieve. She had returned the ring that night, not out of anger, but out of what she called practicality. Jessica's company had indeed scaled rapidly after their breakup. Within 2 years, she had raised multiple rounds of funding, hired dozens of employees, and pivoted completely away from educational software toward enterprise solutions that generated substantial revenue. TechNova Solutions became the success story she had always dreamed of building, featured in business magazines and celebrated at industry conferences. Jessica herself became a symbol of female entrepreneurship, speaking at events about breaking barriers and achieving work-life integration. Marcus had tried to follow her success from a distance, the way one might track the career of an ex-lover with a mixture of pride and loss. He had been genuinely happy for her achievements, even as they highlighted the distance that had grown between them.
The different paths their lives had taken. While Jessica was raising venture capital and hiring senior executives, Marcus was getting married to Rebecca, a kindergarten teacher he had met at a community center where he volunteered on weekends. His marriage to Rebecca had been comfortable rather than passionate, built on shared values and complementary lifestyles, rather than the intense connection he'd experienced with Jessica. Rebecca wanted stability and family life, goals that aligned with Marcus's own desires for a more balanced existence. They had bought a house in a good school district, planned carefully for Emma's arrival, and created the kind of predictable suburban life that had seemed impossible during the chaos of graduate school and startup culture. For several years, Marcus had been content with his choices. His marketing career had progressed steadily at Morrison M. Associates, where he managed campaigns for mid-sized businesses and earned enough to support his family comfortably. Emma had been a joy from the moment she arrived, a bright and curious child who brought purpose and laughter to every day. Rebecca had been a loving mother and reliable partner, someone who shared household responsibilities without drama and supported Marcus's volunteer work as long as it didn't interfere with family time. But contentment wasn't the same as happiness. and Marcus had gradually realized that he had chosen security over passion, stability over the kind of deep connection that made ordinary moments feel electric. His marriage to Rebecca had functioned well on practical levels while leaving him feeling emotionally isolated. They had different interests, different communication styles, and different visions of what their future should look like. The divorce, when it came, had been more of a mutual acknowledgement of incompatibility than a dramatic confrontation. Rebecca's departure with her personal trainer had hurt Marcus's pride more than his heart, though he had struggled with feelings of failure and inadequacy. The financial consequences had been more devastating than the emotional ones. Legal fees, child support calculations, and the division of assets had left him with limited resources to rebuild his life. The job loss had come at the worst possible time, when his confidence was already shaken and his support systems were strained. The years of struggle that followed had taught Marcus lessons about resilience and priorities that his comfortable suburban life never could have provided. Living paycheck to paycheck with a young daughter depending on him had stripped away everything non-essential and revealed what truly mattered. Emma's happiness and security became his primary focus, and every decision was filtered through the question of what would be best for her long-term well-being. Working at Hope's Kitchen had reconnected Marcus with a sense of social purpose that had attracted him to nonprofit work in graduate school. Serving food to people who needed it reminded him that success could be measured in ways other than salary figures and career advancement. The other volunteers had become his community, people who showed up consistently not for recognition or compensation, but because helping others was simply the right thing to do. Emma had flourished despite their reduced circumstances, or perhaps because of them. Without the distractions of excessive material possessions, she had developed independence, creativity, and empathy that impressed her teachers and friends' parents. She wrote stories about characters who helped their neighbors, collected spare change to donate to animal shelters, and treated their modest apartment like a palace because it was home to the people she loved most. Now, seeing Jessica again had stirred up emotions and questions that Marcus thought he had resolved. What had driven her to that soup kitchen? Was she researching a new business venture, gathering data for some corporate social responsibility initiative? Or was something more personal happening in her life, something that had made her want to experience how the other lived?
The woman he had seen today looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, as if she was carrying burdens that success couldn't alleviate. Marcus realized that despite everything that had happened between them, despite the years and the different directions their lives had taken, he still cared about Jessica's well-being. The love had evolved into something more complex but no less real, a concern for someone who had shaped his understanding of partnership and ambition. Tomorrow was another Saturday, another shift at Hope's Kitchen, and Marcus found himself hoping that Jessica would return so he could begin to understand what had brought her to that corner table, eating mashed potatoes and looking like someone who had lost everything that mattered. The following Saturday arrived with an unseasonable chill that made Marcus grateful for the warmth of Hope's Kitchen. He arrived early, as had become his habit, helping Carlos prep vegetables and arrange serving stations before the doors opened at 11. His hands worked automatically, chopping onions and carrots, while his mind wandered to questions he couldn't shake about Jessica's mysterious appearance the week before. "You seem distracted today," Carlos observed, his weathered hands efficiently dicing tomatoes. The retired teacher had an uncanny ability to read the volunteers who worked alongside him, perhaps a skill developed during 30 years of managing teenagers. Marcus paused in his chopping, considering how much to reveal. "Just thinking about someone I used to know. Saw them here last week and couldn't figure out why they needed to be here." Carlos nodded thoughtfully. "People come to us for all kinds of reasons. Some need food, some need community, some need to remember what it feels like to be human again. Best not to judge why someone walks through our doors." The wisdom in Carlos's words settled over Marcus as they finished preparation. By 10:30, a line had already formed outside, a mix of regulars who arrived precisely on schedule and newcomers who approached the entrance with hesitation. Marcus scanned the faces through the window, looking for auburn hair under a baseball cap, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. The morning service proceeded normally, until 12:15, when Marcus noticed a commotion near the entrance. A woman in expensive heels and a tailored coat was arguing with Sister Margaret about health department regulations and kitchen safety protocols. The woman held a clipboard and kept gesturing toward the serving area while speaking in the clipped tones of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm sorry, but this facility doesn't meet current standards for food service operations," the inspector was saying. "The refrigeration units are outdated, the flooring shows signs of wear that could harbor bacteria, and your volunteer screening process lacks proper documentation." Sister Margaret's usually calm demeanor showed cracks of frustration. "We've been serving this community for 15 years without a single health incident. Our volunteers are dedicated people who—" "I'm sure they're well-intentioned," the inspector interrupted. "But good intentions don't prevent foodborne illness. I'm recommending temporary closure until these violations are addressed." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Hope's Kitchen operated on donations and grants that barely covered basic expenses. The upgrades the inspector was demanding would cost tens of thousands of dollars the organization simply didn't have. Around him, other volunteers had stopped working to listen, their faces reflecting the same concern that gripped his chest. The inspector continued her critique, pointing out additional infractions that seemed increasingly petty. A small chip in one serving bowl, a barely visible stain on a wall that had been cleaned thoroughly that morning, requirements for permits that had never been necessary before. Marcus began to suspect this wasn't a routine inspection, but something more targeted and deliberate. During the inspector's lengthy documentation process, Marcus noticed someone slipped through the kitchen's back entrance. Jessica moved quickly but quietly, wearing the same worn clothes as the previous week. She kept her head down and found a seat at the same corner table, but this time Marcus was watching for signs that she didn't belong. Her posture was wrong for someone truly in need. Despite the shabby clothing, she sat straight-backed with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and presentations. Her hands, though she had clearly tried to make them look rough, showed no signs of the calluses and cuts that came from manual labor or life on the streets. Most tellingly, her eyes moved constantly around the room, observing and cataloging details with the focus of someone conducting research rather than someone simply trying to get a meal. Marcus made a decision that surprised him. Instead of staying behind the serving counter, he filled a tray with food and approached Jessica's table directly. She looked up in alarm as he sat down across from her, her green eyes wide with an emotion that looked very much like panic. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus asked, though he was already settling into the plastic chair. "I'm Marcus Chen. I volunteer here most Saturdays." Jessica's voice came out raspier than her natural tone, clearly an affectation. Sarah Johnson. Thank you for the meal." "Sarah Johnson," Marcus repeated, studying her face. "That's interesting. You remind me of someone I used to know. Jessica Walsh. Ever heard of her?" The question landed like a physical blow. Jessica's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "No, I don't know any Jessica. I keep to myself mostly." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Jessica Walsh is the CEO of TechNova Solutions. Very successful company. They recently got a big contract with the city to modernize government systems. I read about it in the Tribune." "I don't read much news," Jessica replied, but her hands were trembling slightly as she picked at her food. "That's too bad," Marcus continued conversationally, "because there's something interesting about that city contract. Part of it involves upgrading systems for social services, including health department inspections. I imagine a company with that kind of access could influence when and where inspectors choose to focus their attention." Jessica's face went pale beneath the artificial dirt smudges. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Marcus kept his voice gentle but persistent. "Because it seems awfully coincidental that Hope's Kitchen is facing its first serious health inspection in 15 years, right around the time a mysterious newcomer starts showing up to observe how the operation works." For several long seconds, they stared at each other across the small table. The sounds of the kitchen continued around them, volunteers serving food, guests eating and talking, the health inspector continuing her documentation. But in their corner, silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Finally, Jessica spoke in her natural voice, dropping the raspy pretense. "How long have you known?" "Since the moment you walked in last week," Marcus admitted. "The question is why. Why are you here, Jessica? And what does TechNova Solutions want with a soup kitchen?" Jessica glanced around nervously as if checking to see who might be listening. It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for weeks. "The city contract comes with requirements for corporate social responsibility initiatives. My board wanted something that would look good in press releases without requiring much actual commitment. They suggested we identify an underperforming charitable organization, document its problems, then swoop in with a donation and management expertise to save it." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. "And Hope's Kitchen was your target." "The board's target," Jessica corrected quickly. "They wanted before and after records. Photos, testimonials about corporate leadership, something that would show TechNova as a company that cares about community impact." "So you came here to spot on us, to find problems you could exploit for publicity." "I came here to understand what we would be getting involved with," Jessica said defensively. "I wanted to see how the operation actually worked before my company made any commitments." "And the health inspector?" Jessica's silence was answer enough. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You orchestrated this whole thing. The inspection, the violations, all of it. You're trying to destroy this place so you can ride in like a hero and save it." "It's not that simple," Jessica began, but Marcus was already walking away. He returned to the serving area, his hands shaking with rage and disappointment. The Jessica he had known in graduate school would never have manipulated people's lives for corporate gain. But that Jessica apparently no longer existed, replaced by someone who saw human need as an opportunity for public relations victories. The health inspector finished her work around 1 o'clock, leaving behind a stack of violation notices and a deadline of 30 days to address all issues or face permanent closure. Sister Margaret gathered the volunteers after the last guest had been served, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We'll figure this out," she said simply. "We always do. This community needs us, and we need each other." As the volunteers dispersed, Marcus lingered to help with cleanup duties he usually skipped. He needed time to process what he had learned, to understand how the woman he had once loved could have become someone capable of such calculated manipulation. Through the kitchen's back window, he watched Jessica slip away down the alley, still dressed in her costume of poverty, carrying secrets that could destroy everything Hope's Kitchen represented. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment researching TechNova Solutions on his laptop while Emma practiced piano in the next room. The company's website featured glossy photos of diverse employees and highlighted their commitment to social justice and community partnerships. Jessica's biography described her as a visionary leader dedicated to using technology to solve society's most pressing challenges. The disconnect between the public image and the woman who had sat across from him that afternoon was staggering. Marcus found himself wondering what had happened to transform his idealistic former fiancé into someone who could exploit charitable organizations for corporate benefit. Success had clearly come at a cost he was only beginning to understand, and the price appeared to be measured in more than money. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jessica's face when he had confronted her, the way her carefully constructed facade had crumbled under direct questioning. By 3 in the morning, he gave up on rest and moved to the kitchen table with his laptop, determined to understand exactly what TechNova Solutions was planning for Hope's Kitchen. What he discovered in his research made his stomach turn.
TechNova's corporate social responsibility page featured a section called Community Transformation Initiatives that outlined their strategy for partnering with struggling nonprofits. The language was sanitized corporate speak, but the pattern was clear.
They would identify organizations facing operational challenges, provide emergency funding with strings attached, then leverage their involvement for maximum publicity value. The most damning evidence came from a case study about a homeless shelter in Milwaukee that TechNova had rescued the previous year. Before and after photos showed a transformed facility with modern equipment and fresh paint. Press releases highlighted Jessica's personal involvement and the company's commitment to social justice. But buried in a local newspaper article Marcus found through deep searching, he learned that the original staff had been replaced with TechNova-approved management. The shelter's mission had been altered to align with corporate priorities, and several longtime volunteers had quit in protest over the changes. Marcus printed everything he could find and organized it into a folder that grew thicker as dawn approached. When Emma woke up for school, she found him still at the table, surrounded by papers, his coffee cold and his expression grim. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her 8-year-old intuition picking up on his distress. "Just working on something important, sweetheart," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "How about pancakes for breakfast?" As he cooked Emma's favorite meal, Marcus's mind churned with strategies for protecting Hope's kitchen from Jessica's scheme. He could expose the plan to Sister Margaret, but without concrete proof of coordination between TechNova and the health inspector, his accusations would sound like conspiracy theories. He could go to the media, but Jessica's reputation and corporate connections would likely outweigh the word of an unemployed single father. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While Emma was getting dressed for school, Marcus's phone rang with a call from Janet, the nurse who volunteered mornings at the kitchen. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Marcus, you need to see something. Can you meet me at St. Catherine's Hospital during my break? I work in administration there, and I stumbled across something that might explain yesterday's inspection." St. Catherine's Hospital sat in the heart of downtown Chicago, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that served as the medical center for the city's elite. Marcus felt out of place in the marble lobby, but Janet met him at the information desk with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. "I was processing insurance claims yesterday evening when I noticed something strange," Janet explained as they walked toward the elevator. "TechNova Solutions has been covering health insurance premiums for several city employees, including some people who don't work directly with technology systems." They rode the elevator to the 15th floor, where Janet's office overlooked the city skyline. She pulled up files on her computer screen, pointing to a list of names and payment records. "Look at this," she said. "Margaret Foster, Senior Health Inspector for the Department of Public Health. Her family's medical coverage has been paid by TechNova for the past 6 months, disguised as a consulting contract for systems integration services." Marcus stared at the evidence, feeling pieces of the puzzle click into place. They bought her. Jessica's company is literally paying the inspector who shut down Hope's kitchen. "It gets worse," Janet continued, scrolling through more records. 3 other inspectors have similar arrangements, and look at the timing of the payments. They all coincide with increased inspection activity at nonprofit organizations throughout the city. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Jessica hadn't just targeted Hope's kitchen, she had systematically compromised the city's health inspection process to create opportunities for TechNova's corporate philanthropy program. Dozens of charitable organizations had likely been manipulated or shut down to serve her company's public relations needs. Janet printed copies of everything she had found, careful to remove any identifying information that could trace back to her unauthorized access. "I could lose my job for showing you this, but what they're doing to places like Hope's Kitchen is criminal." Armed with concrete evidence, Marcus felt a surge of righteous anger that reminded him of his younger self, the idealistic graduate student who had believed business could be a force for positive change. He thanked Janet and drove straight to TechNova. Downtown headquarters, a sleek tower that embodied Jessica's transformation from passionate student to corporate executive. The building's lobby featured inspirational quotes about innovation and social responsibility, etched into polished stone walls. Marcus approached the reception desk and asked to speak with Jessica Walsh, knowing she would likely refuse to see him but needing to make the attempt anyway. "I'm sorry, but Miss Walsh doesn't take unscheduled appointments," the receptionist replied with practiced politeness. "I can connect you with someone in our community relations department if you have a charitable request." "Tell her Marcus Chen is here," he said. "Tell her it's about Hope's Kitchen." The receptionist made a brief phone call, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine surprise. Within minutes, Jessica appeared in the lobby, her composure clearly rattled. She wore a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, her auburn hair styled in a sleek bob that bore no resemblance to the messy ponytail she had hidden under a baseball cap. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. Jessica glanced around the busy lobby, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting. "There's a coffee shop on the second floor. 5 minutes." The coffee shop occupied a corner of the building's atrium, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the Chicago River. Jessica ordered a double espresso and sat across from Marcus at a small table, her hands wrapped around the cup as if seeking warmth. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. Marcus placed Janet's printed documents on the table between them. Health Inspector Margaret Foster, family insurance paid by TechNova for 6 months, consulting contract for services she's not qualified to provide. Jessica's face went white as she recognized the hospital letterhead and insurance payment records. "Where did you get these? Does it matter? What matters is that you've been bribing city officials to shut down charitable organizations, so your company can play hero. Hope's Kitchen isn't your only victim." "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The board, the investors, the constant demand for growth and positive publicity, everything has to serve multiple purposes. Every decision has to generate measurable returns. So you decided to manufacture crises you could solve for good press? I decided to find sustainable ways to help organizations that were already struggling." Jessica shot back, some of her old fire returning. Hope's Kitchen was operating with outdated equipment and no long-term financial plan. "The health violations were real, Marcus. All we did was accelerate their discovery by bribing the inspector to focus her attention where you wanted it." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. "Margaret Foster approached us, not the other way around. She needed help with her daughter's medical bills, and we needed someone who understood regulatory compliance. It was mutually beneficial. It was corruption. It was business." The words came out harder than Jessica seemed to intend. "Everything is business now, Marcus. Charity is business. Goodwill is business. Public perception is business. You can judge me for adapting to reality, but at least I'm actually helping these organizations instead of just feeling good about ladling soup once a week."
The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Marcus's volunteer work at Hope's Kitchen had made him feel useful and connected to his community, but it hadn't solved the underlying problems of poverty and food insecurity that brought people to their doors week after week. "There's a difference between helping and exploiting," Marcus said. "Hope's Kitchen serves this community because the people who run it care about the individuals who walk through those doors. You see them as props in your corporate redemption story. I see them as people who deserve better than charity that keeps them dependent instead of lifting them up." Jessica replied, "TechNova's partnership would bring job training programs, technology education, pathways to actual employment. We're offering transformation, not just temporary relief." "At what cost? You replace Sister Margaret with corporate management. You change the mission to fit your marketing needs. You turn a community resource into a company asset." Jessica leaned forward, her green eyes intense with conviction. "I turn a failing operation into something sustainable and effective. The Milwaukee shelter we partnered with has placed 63 people in permanent housing and helped 47 find employment. Compare that to their previous record of providing beds and meals with no exit strategy." Marcus studied her face, seeing echoes of the passionate woman he had fallen in love with, alongside something harder and more calculating. "And if those people don't want your help, if they prefer the community they've built to the program you want to impose?"
then they're choosing to remain victims instead of becoming survivors. The conversation revealed the fundamental chasm that had opened between them over the years. Jessica had embraced a philosophy that reduced human complexity to business problems with scalable solutions. Marcus still believed in the messy, inefficient, deeply personal work of meeting people where they were and offering what they needed, rather than what some corporate strategy deemed optimal. "I'm going to expose this," Marcus said, gathering up the documents. "The bribes, the manufactured crises, all of it." Jessica's expression shifted to something he had never seen before, cold and calculating in a way that made him feel like he was looking at a stranger. "With what resources? You're unemployed, Marcus. You have a daughter to support and bills you can barely pay. Do you really want to start a legal battle with a company that employs some of the best lawyers in the city?" The threat was delivered quietly, almost conversationally, but it hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was what Jessica had become. Someone who would use his love for Emma as leverage to protect her corporate interests. "You're threatening my daughter." "I'm pointing out reality. You have more to lose than I do." Marcus stood up slowly, his hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. "I used to love you. I used to believe you could change the world." "I am changing the world," Jessica replied, "just not in a way you wanted me to." Marcus sat in his apartment that evening, staring at the documents scattered across his kitchen table while Emma practiced violin in her bedroom. Jessica's threat echoed in his mind, but louder was the memory of Sister Margaret's face when the health inspector had delivered her ultimatum. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for Channel 7's investigative reporting team. The story broke 3 days later with devastating precision. Marcus had provided all the evidence Janet had gathered, and the reporters had uncovered additional layers of corruption throughout the city's inspection system. By noon, TechNova's stock price had dropped 12%, and calls for Jessica's resignation dominated social media. Marcus was cleaning his apartment when Emma answered a knock at their door. "Daddy, there's a lady here who looks sad," she called out. Jessica stood in the hallway, no longer the polished executive, but someone who looked genuinely broken. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a manila envelope in her trembling hands. "I resigned this morning. The board voted me out anyway, but I resigned first." Marcus stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him so Emma wouldn't overhear. "What do you want, Jessica?" "To make it right." She held out the envelope. "This is a cashier's check for $2 million. It's my personal money, not company funds. Enough to renovate Hope's kitchen properly and establish an endowment for ongoing operations." Marcus stared at the envelope without taking it. "Money doesn't fix everything you've done." "I know, but it's a start." Jessica's voice broke slightly.
7 years convincing myself that success justified any methods. I told myself I was helping people while I was actually using them. You were right to expose me. Why should I believe this isn't another manipulation? Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because I have nothing left to manipulate for. TechNova is finished with me. The investors have pulled out. The board is considering criminal charges. My reputation is destroyed." For the first time since their confrontation at the coffee shop, Marcus saw echoes of the woman he had once loved. Vulnerability had cracked through years of corporate armor, revealing someone who looked lost and genuinely remorseful. Sister Margaret will never trust you. She shouldn't. But maybe she'll trust you to handle this properly. Jessica pressed the envelope into his hands. "Make sure it goes where it's needed most. No strings attached, no publicity, no corporate partnerships, just help." Marcus held the check, feeling its weight. $2 million could transform not just Hope's Kitchen, but dozens of similar organizations throughout the city. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. Learn to live with what I've done, I suppose. Try to find a way to help people without hurting them in the process." Jessica stepped back toward the elevator. "Tell Emma I said hello. She's lucky to have a father who fights for what's right." 6 months later, Hope's Kitchen reopened in a renovated facility with new equipment, expanded programs, and a full-time staff that included several former TechNova employees who had quit in solidarity after the scandal broke. Marcus had been hired as the program coordinator, finally finding work that aligned with his values while providing stability for Emma. Jessica had moved to Seattle, where she worked for a small nonprofit developing technology solutions for homeless shelters. She sent occasional updates through mutual friends, never asking for forgiveness, but quietly building a different kind of life focused on service rather than success. The new Hope's Kitchen served twice as many people as before, offering not just meals, but job training, childcare, and community support services. Emma often came after school to help with homework programs for younger children, continuing a family tradition of service that felt natural rather than obligatory. Marcus kept Jessica's final gesture private, telling Sister Margaret only that an anonymous donor had wanted to help without recognition. Some acts of redemption, he had learned, were most powerful when they remained unseen, measured not by public acknowledgement, but by the quiet transformation of lives, touched by unexpected grace. On Saturday mornings, as he watched families gather around tables in the warm, welcoming space that had risen from corporate manipulation and personal betrayal, Marcus reflected on the strange paths that led people toward healing. Sometimes, the greatest gift you could give someone was the chance to make amends, even when forgiveness remained distant and uncertain.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.